The early morning light crept through the blinds, soft rays touching the edges of the nursery. The faint chirping of birds outside barely broke the silence of the room, a silence that felt heavier than usual. Inside, a soldier sat on the rocking chair, his uniform pressed neatly, boots shined, everything prepared for the duty that called him away. But in his arms, cradled close to his chest, lay a tiny bundle, the reason why his heart was breaking more than ever before. His daughter, only 3 months old, slept with her tiny fist curled against his chest, her breath warm against his uniform, her baby scent, soft powder, milk, innocent, strapped around him like chains he never wanted to escape from. He rocked her slowly, his eyes wet but refusing to let the tears fall just yet. "Hey, little angel," he whispered, his voice hoarse, trembling as if each word cost him strength. "Daddy's got to go for a while, but I promise I'll be back. You'll grow up strong, and when I come home, I'll be right here to hold you again." The baby stirred slightly, making a soft cooing sound that broke him more than a battlefield ever could. He pressed his lips to her forehead, memorizing the feel of her skin, the warmth of her tiny body against his. He wanted to capture this moment forever, because deep inside, a gnawing fear told him this might be the last time. From the doorway, his wife leaned against the frame, her eyes swollen from crying the entire night. She had said she wouldn't cry this morning, that she wanted to be strong for him, but as she watched her husband, her soldier, cling to their daughter with every ounce of his soul, her heart cracked in ways words could never explain. "You're going to miss the bus," she whispered, her voice breaking. He turned, his eyes locking on hers. For a moment, they didn't look like soldier and spouse. They looked like two fragile people standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the wind was about to push them apart. "I know," he said softly, "just a few more minutes." She nodded, swallowing hard, because she knew he wasn't talking about the bus anymore. He was talking about life, about time, about fate. He adjusted the baby in his arms, rocking her gently. "You know," he said with a shaky smile, "I thought I understood what bravery was. I thought it was about facing bullets and standing tall, but now—" He looked down at the baby again, his lips trembling as another tear slipped free. "Now I know bravery is walking away from this, from you both, and still having faith that I'll see you again." His wife walked over and knelt beside him, resting her hand on his knee. "She'll know you," she whispered fiercely, as if her words alone could shield him from war. "Even if you're gone for a while, I'll tell her about you every day. She'll hear your voice in the recordings. She'll see your face in the pictures. She'll grow up knowing her daddy is a hero." "A hero," he repeated, his voice bitter, almost broken. "Heroes don't want statues or stories. Heroes just want to come home." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. He wanted to scream, to throw down his uniform, to say he wouldn't go. But duty was a chain wrapped tightly around his soul. He had sworn an oath, his brothers, and arms were waiting. He couldn't abandon them. Still, as he stared at his daughter's sleeping face, the battle inside his chest raged louder than any gunfire. Finally, with a slow, painful breath, he rose from the chair, holding his daughter one last time. He kissed her forehead, her tiny nose, her little hands. He pressed his cheek against hers as if to transfer every ounce of love into her skin. When he handed her back to his wife, his arms felt empty, like a part of his body had been ripped away. He looked at his wife, her eyes red, her hands trembling as she clutched their daughter close. "Take care of her," he whispered. His wife nodded, unable to speak, tears streaming down her cheeks. He stepped toward the door, then turned back, memorizing the sight of them, his entire world standing in the nursery, bathed in morning light. He wanted to freeze that image forever, to carry it in his heart when the darkness of war surrounded him. But when he turned again, walking down the hallway with heavy boots, the tears finally spilled freely. Each step felt like betrayal. Each breath felt like goodbye. The bus was waiting outside, other soldiers climbing aboard, their faces pale, their families crying nearby. The air was filled with hugs, last kisses, whispered prayers. It was the sound of 100 hearts breaking at once. He paused at the doorway, looking back one last time. His wife stood at the window, their baby in her arms. She lifted the baby's tiny hand and waved it softly, her tears glistening in the sunlight. He pressed his hand against his chest, over his heart, and mouthed the words, "I love you." Then, with the weight of the world on his shoulders, he climbed aboard. The bus doors closed, the engine roared to life, and as it pulled away, he sat silently, his face turned to the window, the tears streaming freely now, knowing he had just held his baby for the last time, for a very long time, or maybe forever. The battlefield ahead didn't scare him. Death didn't scare him. But leaving behind the tiny life he had just created, that was the sacrifice that cut the deepest. And in that moment, he understood what true courage meant, not facing the war, but walking away from love to fight it. The bus rattled along the empty highway, carrying rows of men dressed in the same olive uniforms, faces set with determination, but hearts heavy with silent goodbyes. John sat by the window, staring out at the blur of trees and open fields, his reflection ghosting back at him in the glass. His throat ached, his eyes still swollen from tears he couldn't hide. He had left pieces of himself behind in that nursery, the warmth of his wife's embrace, the softness of his baby girl's breath, the fragile hope of a future that might never come. The chatter of the other soldiers filled the air, but he barely heard it. Some cracked, nervous jokes to mask the fear. Others stared at their phones, scrolling through family photos, as if clinging to the images might make them stronger. John pulled out his wallet and unfolded the photo Emily had slipped inside before he left. It was of him, holding their daughter the day she was born, her tiny face barely visible beneath the hospital blanket. He traced the picture with his finger as if by touch alone he could feel her again. When the bus reached the base, the atmosphere changed instantly. Orders barked, boots stomped, and the men shifted into soldiers once more. Uniforms were adjusted, weapons checked, packs lifted. They were no longer husbands, fathers, sons, or brothers. They were warriors, bound to each other by duty and survival. Yet in John's heart, the image of his baby girl never left. She was there when he laced his boots tighter, when he strapped on his gear, when he boarded the massive military plane that would carry him halfway across the world. As engines roared and the ground fell away beneath him, he whispered into the hum of the plane, "Daddy loves you." The desert air was unforgiving. Days blurred into nights, nights into days. The heat scorched their skin by daylight, and the cold bit into their bones after sunset. Dust clung to everything, uniforms, weapons, hair, skin. John moved through it all with the calm efficiency of a trained soldier, but his heart always tugged elsewhere. Letters from home were rare treasures. Emily's handwriting, soft and steady, spoke of their daughter's first giggles, her first attempts at rolling over, her fascination with the ceiling fan. Each line was a knife and a bomb all at once. He was missing everything, but he was grateful to know. When the camp quieted at night, John would sit on his cot, rereading those letters under the dim light of his headlamp. Sometimes he would press the baby's picture against his chest and close his eyes, pretending the faint thump of his heartbeat was hers. His brothers, and Arms noticed, "She's keeping you alive," one of them said one evening as they huddled in the dusty tent, cleaning their rifles. John gave a small smile, not denying it. "Yeah, she is." The missions were dangerous. Convoys through hostile terrain, sweeps of abandoned villages, endless patrols under the burning sun. Each step was a gamble, each corner a potential ambush, but through it all, John carried her memory like armor. When bullets cracked in the distance, when the radio blared with frantic orders, when the desert erupted into chaos, he thought of her, the tiny weight in his arms, the warmth of her forehead under his lips, the way she had made him cry harder than any war ever could. One night, the platoon set out on a mission that was supposed to be routine. The desert was unnaturally quiet, the moon a pale sliver overhead. John led his squad carefully, every muscle tense. He felt it before it happened, the sudden shift in the air, the eerie stillness that warned of danger. And then, like thunder splitting the sky, the explosion ripped through the night. The ground shook, fire burst upward, the men scattered, returning fire as shouts filled the air. Chaos consumed everything. John's ears rang, his vision blurred, but training pulled him forward. He barked orders, dragged a wounded comrade behind cover, returned fire with steady hands. Bullets whipped past, dust and smoke stung his eyes. And in the middle of it all, he thought of her, his baby girl, his angel. As the firefight raged, John's squad pressed forward, trying to secure the area. He spotted a flash of movement, the shadow of a figure with a weapon raised. Instinct took over. He lunged, tackling the threat to the ground. A struggle erupted, fierce and violent, until finally silence. But as John rose, a sharp pain tore through his side. He staggered, hand pressing against his uniform, now dark with spreading blood. His comrades shouted his name, but the world was already tilting, fading around him. He fell to his knees, the desert sand hot beneath him, and for the first time he felt no fear, because in that moment he wasn't in the desert anymore. He was back in the nursery, rocking chair creaking softly, his baby girl asleep in his arms. He could smell her again, hear her tiny breaths, feel the weight of her against his chest. Tears slipped down his face, but they were different this time. Not of fear, not of pain, but of love. His brothers rushed to him, pressing their hands to his wound, shouting for the medic, refusing to let him go. He looked at them, his family in war, and tried to smile. "Tell her," he whispered, his voice weak, broken, "tell her, Daddy never stopped fighting to come home." They told him to hold on, to stay awake, to keep breathing, but his eyes were already heavy. His body was too tired. In those final moments, John wasn't a soldier in the desert. He was a father, holding his daughter for the last time, whispering promises he couldn't keep, praying she would grow up knowing he loved her more than life itself. The world around him blurred into silence. His chest rose one last time, and then, like the desert wind, he was gone. Back home, weeks later, the news reached Emily, the folded flag, the polished casket. The uniformed officers standing at her door with sorrow in their eyes. She clutched her baby girl to her chest, sobbing into her hair, whispering to her over and over, "Your daddy loved you. He loved you so much." At the funeral, as the rifles fired their salute, and the bugle cried its haunting notes, Emily held their daughter tight, pressing the baby's hand to the casket. The baby cooed softly, unaware of the sacrifice her father had made, unaware that the arms that once held her so tenderly would never hold her again. But one day, when she was old enough, Emily would tell her everything. She would show her the letters, the photographs, the medals. She would tell her how her father cried the day he held her, how he whispered to her about bravery and love, how she was the reason he kept going even when the world crumbled around him. And the little girl would grow up knowing the truth, that her father had been more than a soldier. He had been a man who loved deeply, who fought bravely, who sacrificed everything not for glory, but for love. Because in the end, his last thought wasn't of war, or medals, or victory. It was of her, his baby, and that was the greatest legacy he could leave behind.